Ladies and gentlemen, if you're wondering what's brewing up at the ET DataCon Experience Center, I would urge you to experience it firsthand by, of course, exploring the platform there, having a look at all the features where you can engage yourself. And yes, we are cooking up the prizes for you. That's awaiting, of course, for your attention. So make sure you're on your toes, just engaging there rightly. Now, with that, please allow me to do the context setting for the upcoming panel discussion, for which you are, I'm assuming, all ears. So, yes, many large businesses, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, are adopting complex cloud environments. Yes, and why not? This is for the flexibility, scalability, and the privacy that it has to offer, right? So, however, ensuring that these environments are safe requires cloud security expertise that not every IT department is able to access. So, it's time now that during this session, we explore only the essentials. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about the inside of the Sky Vault, a panel discussion that would revolve around ensuring enterprise level security in complex cloud environments. Of course, so I must tell you that we have accomplished panelists on board with us for the upcoming panel discussion. So join me in e-welcoming, ladies and gentlemen, all you delegates there, wherever you are. Virtual claps, any claps are welcome, as long as you have a vibe of welcome towards our panelists. Please welcome Harshad Mengle, the Chief Information Security Officer from Future Group. Allow me to also welcome next Uday Deshpande, Chief Information Security Officer from the L&T Group of Companies. I am very happy to also have on board Bharat Panchal, the Chief Risk Officer, India, Middle East and Africa from FIS Global. Also, we are happy to have Sridhar Sidhu, the SVP and Head IS from Wells Fargo. Please allow me to welcome Sahir Hidayatullah, the CEO from Smokescreen. That's awesome. And with that, I'll also be once again inviting on the screen the founder and CEO from Cybel Inc., Binu Arora. Well, yes, the proceedings are going to be taken care by our moderator, the Mr. Moderator, of course, whose name is Atul Gupta, the partner IT and advisory and cybersecurity leader from KPMG. Atul, with that, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Shikha, thanks for giving us that quick introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone who is joining in for this panel today. It's going to be a very, very power-packed discussion. You may have already guessed it right by listening to the introduction of the panelist members, which was given so beautifully by Shikha. Having a panel which is so accomplished and a privilege which is honor to me at this point of time to moderate this panel brings across a unique challenge to me. But we'll keep that aside, whether I come across on the challenge fairly well or not. I'm very keen to make sure that as we close out the panel, for everyone who's attending this panel discussion today, they can take takeaways from the session today. So I'll be making sure that all the panel members get to talk more than what I get to talk, because you are the ones who are going to give up the key takeaways, which will be implementable, which will be practical, which will be contextual in today's environment. And having a mix whereby we bring in industry veterans and bring in security technology vendors or providers really makes it very holistic. So with that context, let me just get started. I am a consultant, and a consultant lives his life by using some numbers. So I have to get started with some numbers, yeah. And pardon me for using that, but you know that's how the 20 years of me in KPMG has taught me of how the lifeline really works upon. Well. What we are talking upon today is focusing around data, and we're talking about cloud. But just let's reflect back on the 5 months, and there are multiple data points, multiple statistics which are available, which show that enterprises have been able to accomplish in the last 3 months what possibly was not being accomplished in the next 2 years when it comes onto the data and the digital journey. Keep that one reference in context as we go through the panel, because I'm going to talk upon a different data point which KPMG came up in its global report, which was on cloud adoption. And that report brought upon that almost 92% of the organizations which are aspiring to get onto the cloud believe that they have gap in their readiness from a security standpoint to get onto cloud. Very conflicting views. One side, we are saying in last 3 months, we have seen what would possibly wouldn't have happened in 2 years. On the other side, the data point tells us 92% of the organizations were not ready. And here we have a panel which will bring across a perspective saying how this gap is being bridged. It's a reality. It's happening at this point of time. So without much ado, let me get the conversation going and let me bring in an industry perspective over here. Let me start with Uday. Uday, I'll come across to you. Uday, you represent industry which gets classified as critical infrastructure, which also gets classified as someone which is not very technology dependent organization or industry. But an organization like you is also seeing a shift happening at this point of time. It will be good to get your perspectives in the way how the technology shift is happening on the cloud adoption, as well as what are some of the challenges which emerge when we start looking at that migration happening or that hybrid environment to get created from a security standpoint. I'll request you to be unmuted.
Am I audible? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
So good afternoon, everyone. So like what you said, we represent critical infrastructure. Some of our companies basically represent critical infrastructure, and primarily others are from B2B segment. So our primary, we deal with government contracts and large scale companies. So from the cloud adoption perspective, our demand is basically on IP protection rather than, getting the advantage of the scalability or flexibility or agility from the cloud. So from that perspective, we are very, very conservative in terms of adopting the cloud. And we basically rely on having the crown jewels still on-prem data centers, and whatever is less critical is being was being basically moved into cloud. Nevertheless, slowly that perception is changing now with the adoption of O365 and kind of SaaS-based platforms, SaaS and PaaS-based platforms. So the organization is moving. There is no doubt about it. So the cloud adoption is happening, but there are multiple ways. There are multiple things which come into the picture, like whether are we moving the crown jewels to the cloud, whether there are any compliance related things which are coming into the picture, because since we have the critical infrastructure, whether that regulations, these applicable regulations allow us to take the data outside our premises, whether we are supposed to take advantage of the DR being outside Indian geography, or the overall ROI, whether it really proves from our perspective that moving to cloud, whether it's going to give us definite cost advantage or not, because B2B, the margins are very less, not as big as BFSI. So we have to keep that cost angle very, very stringent in order to adopt the cloud. No, so these are the things from the cloud adoption perspective. As far as security is concerned, like I told you, there are compliance related things. And as the panel moves on, we'll talk about various angles related to the security. Primarily from B2B perspective, the major part which will come into the picture is related to protecting our IPs within the cloud. So from our main intention from cloud perspective is not about confidentiality, integrity and availability altogether, but our primary focus will be to protect the confidentiality and then integrity and then availability. So this is just a brief about our cloud adoption journey. Over to you, Atul.
Thank you so much. Very, very pertinent points, Uday, out over there. If I can just ask you to double click a bit more, Uday, while you talked upon that crown jewels traditionally have not been moving onto cloud. But cloud comes in multiple forms and shapes, a private cloud, a public cloud, and a hybrid cloud. Are you seeing a natural transition which is happening at least on the private cloud? When we start looking upon the crown jewels, is that a trend which you are observing upon? It will be good
Definitely,
to get
that definitely is there. L&T, as far as the adoption of private cloud is concerned, is way ahead in terms of implementing those on our own data centers. And the way we defined it as software-driven data center or software-driven networking, all those concepts are already getting implemented as we speak in our data center. So the journey of private cloud adoption is happening very rapidly in the conservative B2B organizations.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for making that point. Very relevant. Let me on that note bring someone who represents B2C, which is Harshad. Harshad, we got a perspective from a B2B world, and we heard elements which are related to adoption and elements which are related to the focus on cyber security. B2C world represents a very different dynamics, speed, agility, ability to turn around things very fast in a quick manner, react to some of the external environments, not enough time available. And I'm assuming you got an opportunity to play much more and much earlier in this world of cloud. And across versions of cloud, when we are talking of public, private, or hybrid cloud environment, it will be good to hear your perspectives around there, Harshad. As well, bring upon some of the elements saying that what do these things really imply for any enterprise who's adopting, because we get to hear infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Is there a differentiation which comes across from a security when someone is looking at these services? Look forward to your thoughts, Harshad.
Yeah. Thanks, Atul. I hope I'm audible.
You're audible.
Yeah. Yes. So B2C is, of course, is a big change when if compared to with comparison with the B2B. What we have seen is basically cloud-based services has revolutionized the cyber security. If you look at the providers, cloud providers are always trying to demonstrate that their products are much better. They're trying to outcompete with on-premise solution in terms of agility, scalability, and we have witnessed this in the retail. My observation here is basically when it comes to security, as you rightly said, there are three models: IPaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as services. What I have seen is basically we also look into the mobile backend as service, which is upcoming. Function as a service, which are also like serverless technologies. These are some space which are equally important from a retail standpoint, because everything is moving towards user interface. Now everybody has to think from a user perspective, how your UI should look like. At the same time, we have to also ensure that the security is also not compromised. So balancing these two things are always a difficult task, because when there is a user demand, it's basically a business which is basically demanding a move, and agility always works with the business. So what I have seen is, or witnessed, is basically security has to we always work together with business, and this is how actually the entire shift we have seen. When there is a new product, there is a new services or any new offerings we need to roll out, business also aware that security has to be taken consideration before doing any kind of a new deployment in the production environment. So that is something which we have seen. Now, as far as the shared responsibility of cloud is concerned, what my thoughts are basically, cloud by default is not secure. So when it comes to security, it is a joint responsibility. Of course, vendor has to, of course, bear a lot of guns on their shoulder. At the same time, the responsibility at customer end is also equally important. They do not manage endpoints. As far as endpoints are concerned, access controls are concerned, cloud has a very minimal role to play. So in my opinion, if you look at the recent attacks, if you look at the recent development, I think the endpoint is the most important or critical point of failure, and where actually cloud will not take a responsibility of. And I think we have to jointly work together to ensure that the endpoints are also secure. At the same time, the data which is going on cloud has to be secured.
Very fair perspectives, Harsha. Thanks so much for making that point. And I'll keep on coming with my data points. So Harshad, I heard you saying cloud on its own is not secure. KPMG report, which I was referring upon, says that 3 out of 4 organizations believe cloud is more secure than the enterprise. So, so there are these kind of differences which will come across, and that's why this panel is so critical, because we really want people who are listening to us today to take out some tangible outcomes from here and deploy that as they go on. The point which Uday mentioned, very, very relevant one. Again, I wanted to look at the data point. The virtual platform gives you opportunity to sneak peek. I did a peek on the data point. Again, the report brings across saying that organizations were looking more than 50% of cloud adoption for critical applications. At this point of time, globally, the number is less than 5%. And that very much correlates with Uday. But the study also went out and said, not just look at now, just look at 2 years hence from here on. And that data point showcases that 5% becomes very close to 15%. So there is a natural trajectory where organizations are moving, and I think I heard Uday also talking on the same, saying that naturally we are moving forward in that direction. So great points. Thank you so much for making those, Uday and Harshad. Just on the last one on the shared economy, Harshad, which you brought in, it's a beautiful one, because many times it's one should not be in the myth that you get to a cloud and you have outsourced all the concerns. It's a shared responsibility, and the shared responsibility continues upon through the journey. It's not just one time kind of a transaction. Thanks so much for making the point. Given we have talked upon so much around security, we talked on 2 different dimensions. Harshad saying security doesn't come by default by cloud. Study report shows 3 out of 4 organizations believe security it's more secure on cloud. Let me bring in Sahir. Sahir, it will be good to get your perspective. How secure is cloud?
So Atul, I think as an industry, we tend to go through these cycles whenever we find a new technology. And the cycle is, at least for me, becomes fairly predictable. What happens is we find a new technology, the business wants to adopt it, security starts pushing back. And invariably, what we don't understand is we don't even understand what the attack vectors are. Like we've seen this. We've seen this with the perimeter back in the day. Then we decided what we were going to do with firewalls and IDS. Then we decided the internal network was the problem and endpoints were the problem. Now we've decided the cloud is the problem. Most organizations are still not clued in to what those attack vectors are. So, for example, back in the day when you got into application security, SQL injection was new, cross-site scripting was new, right? Now, when you're talking about container-driven attacks, you're talking about SSRF against cloud applications. Most CISOs don't even understand what they're trying to secure. And I mean, it's obviously my bias coming from an offensive security perspective. But I think if you don't understand the bad guy, you're going to run around just doing the equivalent of airport security. You're going to put in place a bunch of things, spend a lot of money, and figure you're securing stuff. And actually, the attack vectors are completely different. That's point one. Point two, and given the current situation of the rapid shift in how infrastructure has moved, I think it's really important that one sees the opportunity that's available from a security perspective. We tend to say, oh, maybe cloud bad, right? But we have to adopt it. It's going to come. You can hold off. You can resist as long as you like, right? But have you thought about how that integrates into, say, your threat detection journey? Most organizations haven't. They haven't thought about the fact that, okay, if I'm going for the cloud, how do I even factor for scalability in my SOC operations? How do I factor for my ability to detect and respond in the cloud? And the answer, which is probably going to happen, is again point solutions. You're going to say, okay, fine, we need something to solve the problem in the cloud. The thing is, cybersecurity is becoming more and more complex. It's probably more important for us to dial it down to the specifics. What are we trying to protect and why? When we say it's IP, fine, I get it, it's IP. When we say it's cloud resources, it's availability. These all finally translate back to some sort of intent that somebody has, some malicious intent that somebody has. If you haven't figured out what that is and how that's going to translate, you're essentially trying to secure your house against a thief that you don't understand whether they're going to break in from the window or the door or whether they're already in the house, right? So I think if organizations have one thing that they want to consider, seriously about the cloud is start understanding the adversary's perspective of the cloud. Probably most folks who are familiar with security are familiar with the Lockheed Martin kill chain. The thing is, the kill chain for the cloud is completely different from the kill chain for on-prem. You talk to any half-decent red team, the way they attack the cloud is completely different. So if you just go and the same thing happened on the application side. If you went and you just said, oh, I'm using the cloud, but you're just using it for infrastructure. It's just your data center in AWS. You're not really using the cloud, right? Similarly, if you just take your traditional security controls from on-prem and you just chuck them into the cloud and you say, oh, I'm doing cloud security, yeah, you're going to be screwed, essentially.
Fair perspectives are here. I think you talked on two very key elements. What are we trying to protect? And I think Uday started by saying crown jewels. And are you putting those crown jewels up out there or not putting it up out there? And once you have put it up out there, and if you don't know the adversaries and you don't know the attack vectors, then it's a it's a different nightmare which one is looking upon. Do you want to talk upon as well, Sahir, before I let you go from this question specifically, because I promised to the audience saying we want to give them some tips which they can deploy, if not tomorrow, at least next week. Are there some simple tips which you want to share with them, which is easy to be fixed upon, not very complex, but can have significant shift in the control environment which they're operating upon? That will be good to know.
I think if you're not multi-cloud, like I'm considering a public cloud environment, if you're not multi-cloud, investigate the resources that are given to you by the cloud providers. If you're in AWS, look at what they're doing with guard duty, look at what you can do with CloudTrail logs, understand the platform capabilities, because most of the platforms have significant capabilities built in. Of course, you may not necessarily be in a position to consume all that stuff, right? If you're multi-cloud, you've got a different problem altogether because you've got to unify that across two different places. I think the simplest tips are, again, once you have a reasonable estate in the cloud, assess the security. Get someone who understands what the vectors are and says, hey, look, that S3 bucket is open. Hey, look, that Lambda function is insecure. This database is something, right? That container is coming from a registry that could be compromised, right? If you don't have that visibility, it's almost like we're restarting vulnerability assessment again for the cloud, which is great for any of us who are in consulting. So great for you, Atul. But I think that's the starting point. Understand what the risks are. Otherwise, you're spending money on things you don't understand, and you're going to waste it.
Very fair perspective. Thanks so much, Sahir, for making those. I also made a note where you talked on the skills, and I think that's a very important point which we'll cover slightly later in the session today. And I'll again, maybe I'm picking that up because I have a data point on that. So I'll touch base on that. Let me bring in Sidhu over here. Sidhu, we heard a B2B perspective. We heard a B2C perspective. We heard from Sahir how the adversaries are changing, how the attack vectors are changing upon. You represent a highly regulated sector, which has a nuance, of having a long or old systems to be maintained upon, be it mainframe-oriented systems, but simultaneously to meet the needs of your key stakeholders, where there is an advanced deployment of digital channels, which is the way of life at this moment. So you truly represent what I would call as a complex hybrid environment, and need to manage consistent compliance to meet with the regulatory requirement, deal with all the challenges which Sahir and Harshad has talked about, and bring all of that together in a place whereby it all looks good. Because if it doesn't look good, we know what's going to happen thereafter. So what's your thoughts around this, Sidhu? How do you really go about that journey?
Thanks, Atul. Before I start saying anything, I need to take a disclaimer. So whatever I say here is based on my collective number of years of experience, not attributable to my employer. So that's off the window. My compliance is done. So Atul, hybrid is going to be the way forward for whether it is large global organization, mid-sized companies in a given country, because that's where But as Uday mentioned, taking non-crown jewels to public cloud, or even for that matter, private cloud, the total cost of operations, and at the same time enhancing the security posture of the otherwise non-critical assets can be improved, right? So that there is absolute economical security risk management reason for any companies to look at hybrid. There are a few companies which are cloud native, good for them, and they probably will do better. The challenges in probably effectively managing the hybrid cloud environment is different for different organizations. Take the case of maybe a mid-sized organization, maybe a regulated non-financial services company. And if they are a medium-sized company, we don't expect to have 300 people, 200 people doing security. What happens is they will engage consultants, obviously do the right job of looking at what the public cloud security features are and how their internal requirements from security standpoint match both the worlds. And that's a good starting point. But what happens later is spinning up that infrastructure. And if that infrastructure is not spun in line with what your local requirements are, cloud service provider cannot be blamed because they gave you the home. If you want to open the window, that's the user problem. So that awareness is not there. And what they generally do to do that kind of a thing is, today's world, 80% of the code is publicly sourced, right? And you stitch together. Now with the public cloud adoption, even the infrastructure is stitched together using some templates, which are literally incomplete, insecure, or inappropriate. Because of the skill gap of the people adopting to the hybrid cloud and the easy access to these templates, pressured by your pace at which you need to make the changes to the customer needs, all is the trifecta literally leading to a non-compliance and potentially exposure. And that's happening everywhere. As you see, 2/3 of the cloud breaches are fundamentally because of inappropriate configuration of the assets. And that is one thing organizations can definitely take a look at it. And once that is done in automated fashion for global organizations, you're a lot more secure, right? Then we can talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning. That's secondary. Keep the hygiene first with the appropriate controls automated, then look at the additional things. So let me stop here.
Hey, great point. Thanks, Sidhu, for making those points. But I would like to get a couple of more perspectives from you. One is saying, if the basics and the hygienes have to be maintained, are there global frameworks which are emerging, or it's too early to talk upon on that? Because the pace of the framework at which it's emerging and the pace at which the digital world is changing, it's just not keeping alignment. So that's the first part which I would like to hear from you. The second part which I would like to hear from you is saying, again, what I asked here, are there some simple tips which one can take out and start practicing it going forward from here? Sure.
So yeah, I mean, obviously different frameworks are evolving, and also there are a good number of open source communities are also evolving. One thing I could probably tell is the Cloud Native Cloud Foundation, which gives you enough meat to get your people trained, educated. And for example, if somebody is going to spin up, say, a storage, right, on a public cloud, what are some basic things that they need to look at, right? So there are sources available, get people trained on that. And most importantly, try have the conversation with the cloud service provider that, yes, I know these are the features for security you're offering. Is there a way that when I spin that infrastructure, when I use that infrastructure, if I'm going to make some mistakes, is there a way that you can monitor and give me some tips, right? Because everything is a service on cloud. Every service calls for resources. Every resource cost, is cost. So that need to be baked in. So even inadvertently, if somebody makes a mistake, is there a monitoring service that you can buy so that you can get immediate response, so that you can quickly look at those things? So that's one, definitely is an option. The second thing potentially is preventive, as I mentioned. Make sure that people spinning that infrastructure, using that infrastructure, are properly trained. And most importantly, it's generally people spin the infrastructure faster, but when the work is done, they leave the trail behind. They don't necessarily bring that infrastructure down, right? The more pertinent that is available persistently for other people, bad actors, persistent infrastructure availability is a good source for compromise too. And then they can laterally move and do all sorts of things that we don't want to. So spinning up in a proactive manner and spinning down immediately when that is not needed.
Brilliant points. Thank you so much, Situ. And I think, again, the skill really came in. I heard Sahir talking on skills, and I hear you very clearly talking on skills. And you're talking at a much broader level, saying right from someone who is just spinning, which may sound very simple in current age, to realize what could be the consequences over there. That brings me to my data point. So let me put my data point. The study report says 73% organizations are looking to have CISO organization to be equipped with cloud security skills. That's what it's coming out very clearly, the trajectory, the direction in which organizations are looking. And that's happening because the cloud adoption is happening at such a fast pace, and hybrid is going to continue. Hey, we got very interesting perspectives. Let me bring in Binu at this point of time. Binu, we've been hearing upon spin-ups happening, not taking off, and that's where the bad actors really come in and play with it, or create all the miseries for possibly organizations, regulators, nations at large. You see it very closely, and I hear you. You not only see this closely from a cloud perspective, but you also get to see where the data leaks are happening, which typically gets reported out on the dark web, right? And that's where there is a parallel economy which starts emerging, and it can create a lot of challenges for organizations. It will be good to get your perspective, Vinu. How are you seeing in this environment, which we are running at this point of time today, and the future which is going to emerge? How is the entire ecosystem of trade? Are we going to see more of these incidents happening? Are we going to see organizations being covered on the financial dailies, front pages because of data leaks coming on dark web and so on and so forth? It will be good to hear your perspectives, Vinu.
Sure, Atul. I mean, from a cyber perspective, as rightly mentioned, we look at the cybercrime markets and the criminals very closely in terms of understanding their tool, techniques, and tactics. And as one of the panelists said, it all boils down to the context of the organization, what business they're doing. So if they're using cloud for, from an economies of scale perspective, or to provide higher availability to the end customer, their crown jewels might be just data. So data probably could be one of the crown jewel which they are currently holding, or their IP. What we have observed, through our researches, is that the cyber criminals are also evolving at the probably, if not the same, probably the faster pace. They think like they are actually pretty smart developers, as far as we have seen it. And they are experts in understanding the systems, and even those systems they haven't played with it, they will learn it pretty quickly. So what we have seen in the context of cloud, the tactics and techniques which we are seeing is not that sophisticated. Largely, there are four channels on how we have seen hackers are able to get into a cloud environment. And the first one is very basic. It's a phishing attacks. So you might, see, yeah, why are we talking phishing today again? But in reality, over 80% of breaches actually do start with a phishing attack or a social engineering attempt. And I'm taking examples of actors such as Knockstick players, shiny hunters, who actually use a variety of phishing attacks using, imprecise or similar GitHub domains to target some real high-profile organizations in the recent days, which we were also closely tracking. The second, which is again, we are a pro cloud organization, but there is an expectation of having common sense. We see a lot of users and developers who are reusing the same passwords across everywhere, and keeping in mind that the same passwords are also accessible to the hackers, and it's not a rocket science, just apply it. And they are running these tools and scripts in a very automated fashion, so not a big deal, but that's one of the ways how they are doing it. Thirdly, what we see very, very, quite often is the actual DevOps. So a lot of organizations have got their DevOps tribes, who are building these awesome products out there. But often those code repositories may be left unprotected. And it happens quite a lot, believe it or not. But there are, very large organizations who have, tribes who basically left to expose their access tokens out on the internet, which the hackers can also see it. And it's not that really complicated to use that information to then get into the cloud environment. But again, that's not really the problem of the cloud provider in that sense. It's the way on how you are managing your backyard, which eventually affects a more sophisticated breach in the later stage. And last but not least, I think this is really important, especially for the tech companies who heavily get engaged with third parties. So, in the context of when you are working with developers or partners and suppliers who also pertain to have access to your information for doing their business operations, what we have seen multiple times that these third parties actually get compromised, and because they had to have access to your information to be able to do their job, it in turn, you become the victim as part of the breach. Big companies, including Mathway, where we were directly involved in disclosing the breach, which occurred because of shiny hunters in this case, that's exactly how they did it. So to my point, I mean, the tactics and techniques are not that complicated from what we are seeing. It's mostly boils down to three things. Are you able to configure your cloud environment appropriately? Are you appropriately segregating the duties of people or personnel in your organization to make sure no dev should have like a full admin level access to your cloud environment? And that happens quite often. And last but not least, I think people who are involved in technology, they should get some level of training to make them understand how the information which they are currently using on their end can have a significant impact if used by a criminal in the dark web and deep web. That's just some of my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Vinu. I think those were very simple points which you said, but they could have significant impact. And you very clearly illustrated the four simple things, being a phishing or a social engineering or a password, reuse of password or code repositories or third parties. I'll possibly see if the time permits, and I'll put that challenge across to the entire panel saying, are we done with passwords? Is security now going beyond passwords? But that's a question which I'll ask slightly later because I hear that as a theme. And, skills continues to be the other theme. So thanks so much for making those points, Vinu. Let me bring in Bharat over here. Bharat, we've heard different dimensions so far when we are looking upon the cloud from a security and a risk point of view. But there's a very, very interesting element which is emerging, and I think Uday did talk upon briefly, saying data residency on cloud. And it's becoming even more or bigger challenge when it comes in from specific regulated industries, because there are regulations which are emerging, which on one side possibly takes away the ability of organization to leapfrog or utilize all the advantages which cloud provides upon, but on the other side also brings a unique challenge because that's what the customers or the stakeholders are expecting. So Bharat, would be here to get your point. It's a bit different from what we have talked so far, but I thought it's important to get this viewpoint as well, and would invite your thoughts around this.
So good to be at the last in this round. So I heard all my eminent friends talking about and of course, Atul, you talked much about data points, why cloud is in thing in today's time. Of course, I come to the point what you said, whether it is taking over the advantage of cloud being data localization and things like that. Let me bring one more perspective. Why people are going for cloud? You think they are going for security? No, they are not. You think they are going for regulatory? They are not. It is just about cost effectiveness. And that's easy flexibility, adaptability, and kind of ease to meet the rapidly increasing demand. People are going for cloud. Now, yes, the regulatory aspect is one thing, and I, at the helm of risk management at NPCI, I've seen how data localization has changed things overnight. and everybody in the, especially banking system, they were forced to put data within country. And uh, luckily in India, so far there is no major breach have happened as far as cloud is concerned. And I quote my dear friend Sidhu's quote, which he always say, "So far so good." Right, right, Sidhu. So far so
Right.
good. Nothing has happened. Nothing has happened so far. But believe me, the day when a cloud is breached in India, all these good data points will get away, and we will be in different direction. So that's the practical scenario. And let me bring the Hindu mythology. And we believe that whenever we talk about God, we always try to see the upside. We look at the clouds. We believe that there is a God. We believe there is a system behind the cloud. How safe, secure, who operates it, which OS he has, we don't know, but we believe there is a God. There is something similarity in today's cloud computing also, because when I'm sorry, but I always try to differ with your data, because 73% of organizations are saying they are safe with cloud. I believe there are no top organizations in this survey, and I believe there are no small organizations in this survey, because the top one are really very, very conservative to go into cloud. The small one are really don't care about whether they want to go in cloud or not. Coming to okay, that was one point. But coming to your specific question about the regulatory requirement, uh, yes, I clearly foresee that is going to be an obstacle is not the right word, but definitely going to be a big impact creator in terms of cloud adoption in our country, because the way data localization has been implemented, the way the data privacy law is coming, we really don't know what is coming there in that. And the another point that RBI always take a lead in regulation, and rest of the regulators just follow it. And that's a tradition. So far what has happened in bank may go to the mutual fund, may go for SEBI, may go for IRDA, and so and so. And on top of that, the data sovereignty is going to be a major talk point. Rather, already started my book, which was released last year, has created enough of sentiment in the decision makers and all. But when it comes to data sovereignty, the mindset of the the regulators and those who are policymakers definitely going to attract towards cloud as well, because any which we are facing a lot of trouble vis-a-vis the boundaryless crime, and adding cloud is adding more fuel into that. So that's going to be a real challenge, and that is what going to impact the benefit of what all you are talking right. That's it from my side.
Great points, Bharat. Thanks so much for making those points. I'll just extend that point, Bharat, and request you to share one more perspective, and maybe we'll get some more thoughts around that. We talked upon how the risk is coming. You talked upon on adoption. You talked on the economics. Then we talked upon on the entire element around attacks happening. We talked upon on awareness. We talked on the skills. We just talked on a regulation, very important and relevant pertinent point. I think what we haven't covered upon is inadequate detail on the forum today is around contractual obligations. How do you bring, because it's a provider versus consumer. We covered quite a lot at a macro level at this point of time. I'd like to get some of your thoughts, Bharat, starting from here, saying, how do you see?
I think yeah, Atul, I think good point, because see how the whole perception about data got changed when GDPR was implemented in Europe. Something similar is coming, and see, unfortunately, in our country, the data privacy and things like are not that sensitive as what we see in the Western world. But slowly, gradually, that has started. Now, just take at the the one particular provision in that the consent manager or right to recall. In now, if they had the contractual obligation, I'm bank where I'm having my bank account open. Bank is hosting the data in cloud. The cloud is God knows in Alaska or Siberia, God knows. And how that whole chain of data, forward and reverse both is maintained. That is going to be a big challenge. And you just see, in today's time, we are not in the 20th century, we are in 21st century. The technology adoption, the awareness about touch points of the whole, cloud computing is may not be known to many as of now, but it may not take that much of time for people to become aware about this. And once the data privacy law is enacted in our country, believe me, it is going to, because WhatsApp University is so much so fast that people will get all good thing, bad thing, all put together, and that will start create sudden pressure on organizations and those who are going to possess the data and process the data and store the data. You just cannot manage that perception of people at that point of time. So that is what is going to be one big impact on forthcoming cloud adoption.
Great one. Thank you so much, Bharat, for making that. And let me bring in Uday also over here. Uday, your thoughts around the contractual obligations, and as a CISO, what should be some of the key focus areas when an organization starts going on the adoption path of cloud and looking at the cloud contract?
Okay. I'll tell you one incident actually. In one of the organization, they lock stock barrel migrated huge number of applications, and everything was good. And after the third, fourth month, they realized that the billing is shooting through the roof, and eventually they said that okay, we will create a strategy, and at this moment, we will start bringing those applications back to the premise. Now the thing is that by the time this decision was being made, the organization being very slow, a lot of data had been was accumulated on cloud, and since nothing was there on the contract, it became extremely difficult to get that data back onto the premise, because there are tons of GB or data. Nothing was there on the contract, and the cloud again charged, service provider charged heavily for getting the data back to the cloud, and the overall the cost benefit went for a toss actually. So that is where the contractual thing will come into the picture. You have to be very, very precise when you are on the contractual obligations. So you need to be very, very specific in terms of how you are going to, in terms of the responsibilities about who's going to manage what. Some of the like somebody told, I think Bharat told that, the DR is there in Norway or other regions. How will I comply to that? If my data is not allowed to be hosted, then in that case, how the DR can be hosted into those countries? Whether my country's regulation will allow me to host the data into those countries or not. These things should be there in the contract. Then another question is, some of the cloud service providers do not allow the key management server to be hosted onto their infrastructure. So you have to basically abide by their own key management, and they have to rely on their key encryptions. So for some of the BFSI industries, this may not be acceptable actually. So these are the things which need to be made explicitly clear when you are contracting with the cloud service provider. Otherwise, this can cost you a lot. That's what I can say from contractual obligation perspective. Thank you.
Brilliant points, Uday. And I think everyone, whether they have gone on the cloud journey or not gone on the cloud journey, can very easily correlate with the case study you talked. And saying it's a one-way street. And if you don't do it rightful, then it truly becomes one-way street. There is no way coming back. So there's no path at all defined on that. Okay, I know we're getting on to last few minutes. I was just checking in case there are any questions coming in from the audience. So while the organizers are checking if there are questions coming, let me go back on that point on the skills and open up. Anyone can pick it up. Saying how is the organization of the risk officer or the CISO office going to be looking like in next 2 years, given cloud adoption is here and the risks which we are talking are so different? What would be some of those key skills which will be in need, and what should be organizations doing today so that they're ready for or they're prepared to address that tomorrow? I'll just throw it open.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me take a lead on this. Of course, the upskilling about newer and newer threat is ongoing task for CISO or CRO. But what I foresee as the chief risk officer, I will have to learn about legal aspect also. The IT Act, because so far we have just scanned the IT Act. Now onward, we'll have to go into deep of this IT Act, and especially when it goes in cloud and all. We'll have to look at in India and other geography wherever the data protection laws are there, how that is going to make complexity and how contractually we can safeguard the organization. And here the obligation is not only the organization as well, but it is for our customers, our partners, our whosoever are working with us. So we'll have to take care of everybody's interests contractually and all this. So in addition to technical skill, legal skill also may require to enhance in coming time.
Very good point.
Maybe if I can extend to what Bharat is saying, as I mentioned, hybrid cloud is definitely a reality and it is going to sustain for a longer period of time. But if you look at the economy of the hybrid cloud, it's going to be anywhere between 500 billion to 700 billion in the next maybe 5-6 years. Right? When that happens, interoperability becomes extremely critical for cost effectiveness of both the service providers as well as the customers. And that will become mandatory. And when that happens, we need to have two different sets of trainings to people. One, immediately getting people trained on the cloud services and solutions the cloud service provider offers. That's a bread and butter. Second is take a step back and give the domain understanding of cloud security, not just the specific tools that people use. When we get that experience and understanding of the domain, and when there is a need for interoperability, because CISO will always be asked, what is the return on investment, right? So when that happens, when you decide to negotiate with alternate service providers, the same set of people need to be able to quickly move to the other tool sets the other service provider gives. That may be 2-3 years down the line, and that is going to be a reality too. It happened in telecom sector. It happened in travel sector, right? It's going to happen in cloud too. So training people in the current solutions of your current service provider and a constant domain training and expertise. I think those are the two for the people, the workhorses. And obviously, Bharat mentioned about the legal, regulatory aspects of that stuff, which is a constant churn.
Excellent. Great points, Setu. And Bharat, thanks for making those points. I know we just in the last minute, Harsha, anything from you from a CISO's organization perspective?
Yeah, so I think in my opinion, I think businesses today are in hot pursuit of agility, and developers are doing a lot of development. DevSecOps is there already. I think, in my opinion, some kind of see if we look at the crime, or rather I would say incident which has happened in cloud. They have happened because of leakage of some sensitive information like access tokens, SSH keys. So I think some kind of a pre-commit hooks to the developer, of course, because most of the time if you look at the cloud, the predominantly it will be used by developers for DevSecOps. And I think there some kind of a pre-commit hooks should be implemented so that these kind of a basic information leakage can be, or sensitive data leakage can be avoided.
And just to add that to what we are also observing in the Western countries, I think today's CISO's life are far more challenging than any other C-level at the board level as well, because they have to wear the hat of a technical expert at the same time talk in the business language where you're talking about value at risk to justify their the business cases and so forth. The trend which we are seeing changing in the next 2 years is that the C-suite community outside of CISO are also becoming equipped with these cybersecurity issues, because that is something they are seeing on day-to-day basis, including the boards as well. So when it comes to data breach, the board doesn't necessarily have to be explained about the reputational damage or the damage to the customer trust. So what we are seeing, especially in the Western context, is the board itself are getting far more educated on these some of the technical issues, and we hope that the life for CISOs will become easier in the coming years as the role played by the regulators, even the public news about the breaches, will actually force them to upskilling themselves as well.
Brilliant point. Thanks so much, Binu, for making that point. I think CISOs play multiple hats. They constantly juggle between multiple hats. That's a very, very fair point. And that brings a unique challenge to them. I just got a message that we have 2 more minutes from the organizers. I think my clock was showing me a bit different. And I wanted to put that across to Sahir and to you, Binu, before we close. We heard on passwords. And there is a debate going on. Passwords are no longer relevant in this environment which we are operating. Sahir, what's your view?
I think it's a fun one. There are definitely pros and cons. Again, taking the attacker's perspective, I once annoyed somebody who was sort of very pro biometrics, because from my perspective, biometrics are a password you cannot change. Biometrics are a username; they're not a password, right? So today, if somebody compromises your password, you can change your password and you can deny access. If somebody compromises, say, biometrics, well, short of you figuring out something with your DNA, you're in a bit of a soup. So I believe credential management is due for major changes. I think the answers are pretty much there. Privileged access management is a thing. It does work. The problem is, again, process. It's not really technology. I think it's pretty easy for you to take the best technology from a credential management perspective and still suck at it. It's always the low-hanging fruit for adversaries. Like if I'm doing a red team assessment, the first thing I'm looking for is passwords.csv, passwords.xls, right? It doesn't matter how secure that organization is, you're going to find that. So I don't think passwords are going away anytime soon. If you mentioned practical tips, go get everybody in your organization a password manager, force them to use it, mandate it. It goes a long way, right? Because then look at some of the themes we had: credential reuse, password reuse, compromised SSH keys, compromised access tokens. Those things go away, they disappear, right? So again, you protect the initial access vector to some extent, at least the low-hanging fruit, but you're going to be remembering passwords for a while, so you may as well do something different with it.
Thanks for making that point, Sahir. Sidhu, you had a perspective on that? I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, I echo with Sahir. It's going to evolve. It's going to evolve in different directions, and one size obviously doesn't fit all. There are some people who would use basically biometric and be comfortable with it, but even the underlying infrastructure in certain global organizations doesn't even permit complex even passwords too. That is also there. So the underlying systems ability also need to be looked at. So yeah, it's a complex game, and you need to look at what kind of controls you can have and how to monitor for additional risks that you may have because of the underlying infrastructure inabilities to do that.
So summary of what Sahir and Sidhu said, that password is died, long live password.
Yeah, Uday, you have a point.
So I feel, thanks to, people like Binu who, continuously go through the dark web and then get the dumps of the leaked credentials. It has helped organizations like ours to enforce multi-factor authentication, because that gives a good amount of reasonable assurance actually. So passwords will never go away in the near while, but adoption of multi-factor has really improved because of the dark web related observations which have come. So thanks to Binu and the team.
Thanks.
Raising hand. I don't know, Binu, you want to disclose who's going to be there on the front page tomorrow morning?
Not today, but hopefully in a couple of weeks' time, because there's always some investigations going on at the same time. But I think I agree with Sahir's point on the lifetime or the lifeline of passwords. So again, I think most of the organization today who are heavily using technologies for all their operations, whether you're in a mining, energy sector, or serving customers through your app on a mobile phone, I think the user experience is what is driving the push on how you actually make things simpler for the end user. Now my dad till today, he still hates the concept password, and I don't want to discuss anymore. But it's the point is, the applications needs to be designed which makes the overall experience intuitive and inclusive. And passwords are a friction without doubt, but they're not gonna go away anytime soon. What we need at the moment is a middle point. Like RV is, having two-factor or multi-factor authentication is the answer for that. We don't know yet. I think there are some innovations which we see in the US, especially in Silicon Valley, where people are coming with even the hard tokens, which you with using the Bluetooth technology, you can just say, yeah, approve the login, and things work seamlessly. So there is definitely a lot of push which we are seeing in the industry to make that overall end user experience better, but at the same time not complicate or compromise the security aspects of it. One day when passwords goes dead, I will open up a champagne bottle, because I don't think
You're not the only one. Many more will be raising their hands, Binu.
Yeah.
But I know this conversation is becoming more and more interesting, and now I'm getting messages that we are off our time. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. As I suggested right at the beginning, this is going to be a power-packed panel. It indeed was. Everyone made their very valid points, right from Uday, bringing a perspective how B2B organizations are looking at adoption of cloud and what does it mean from a cloud security. Complete transformational view coming in from a B2C perspective, which we heard upon from Harshad. Sidhu bringing in a perspective of how hybrid is going to be the life, and that's going to be here. Bharat bringing a dimension, it's not just regulators, it's a legal view, which also will be very important. Skill constantly emerge as one common theme, which is going to get enhanced. And Sahir and Binu, you both of you brought in perspective with some very simple things. Cyber hygienes, cloud hygienes, which is what one doesn't looks upon, possibly in the hasteness, in the agility to do more with less. And that's where things go wrong. Gentlemen, I really liked and loved this conversation. I hope our audience who was attending the session also got the tips which they can go ahead, deploy, if not tomorrow, in the week's time from here. Thank you so much, and let me hand it over back to the organizers over here. Back to the organizing team.
A big thank you to our panelists for their thought-provoking discussions. And on that note, I would request all the delegates to click on the agenda to have a look and to watch the next live session. Thank you.